And action. So welcome everybody. This is SharePoint Dev Weekly. This is episode 30, which is quite nice. So it is 11th of March, and this week we have once again an MVP visitor in the call. So Vardhaman, it is your new MVP, relatively new MVP.
Yeah.
And you are joining the MVP Summit next week. So tell us slightly about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as Vesa said, this is my first year as a MVP. So lots of new things happening. First MVP Summit coming up as well. So looking forward to that. And just to give you a background of myself, I've been working with SharePoint for almost 8 years. I was trying to remember how long it's been. So yeah, it's about 8 years or so. And I remember my very first SharePoint project was to do with the Silverlight client object model. If you guys remember that.
Yeah, we are old enough.
Yeah. So yeah, since then things have moved on. We've been working with a lot of different things. Apart from SPFX and SharePoint, a bit of Azure and front-end TypeScript and stuff as well because of SPFX and stuff. So yeah. Excited to be here.
Yeah, you've been doing really kind of both backend and the front end stuff in your past, because I remember that you've been really active on the PMP activities way back already, related on backend systems and all of that, and provisioning stuff. And then nowadays more on the SharePoint framework. Well, not only in SharePoint framework, but if we think about obviously, if we think about the whole SharePoint ecosystem and development community, it's much more than SharePoint. Obviously, it's the graph, it's the team, it's all of the services in Office 365, it's the Azure story as well. So I even internally, I'm getting every now and then frustrated on people like, hey, but it's not you're representing only the SharePoint ecosystem. No, it's much bigger than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The standard way of doing things recently has become TypeScript, React, and all of that for SPFX. And then if there's some backend code, try to do it in Azure Functions or have a web app or something. So one SharePoint solution can have stuff in there, right from front end TypeScript to Azure Functions and any other.
Yeah, or Flow, Logic apps, Power Apps.
Correct.
Flow is big as well. Power Apps, yeah.
And now that the Microsoft Teams tab development comes with SharePoint Framework, really I've been really starting to kind of define our future in a way that, hey, we're building Microsoft Teams tabs using the Microsoft Graph conceptual APIs, contextual APIs, but then implementing them using SharePoint Framework.
Yeah.
So, which actually really shows the integrations of all of this stuff, because Microsoft Graph is the API layer. Then we have the host, which could be then SharePoint UIs or Microsoft Teams or potentially Office clients in the future. And then we have the implementation techniques like SharePoint Framework. And then we obviously call Azure services using Azure Functions and whatever is available. Yeah. It's pretty mind-blowing how far we've gone actually from 2007 timeframes.
There's so many building blocks. You have to kind of choose from a set of the building blocks and then build your solution. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Waldek, you've been really famous about doing SharePoint.com sites. What you've been up to?
Well, so that is exactly the one thing that I haven't been doing now for
quite a few years.
Yes, I'm trying to think when I built my last one.
But to be fair, you were famous about. I did quite a few of them as well. So
yeah, it's something that I've been doing since I don't know. So, back in the years, all I've been doing is web. So I would start with HTML 3.2 in somewhere, I don't know, not 93, 94, maybe even earlier. Then I would learn PHP. I would do that for a long time. Then I would learn some other things. Then I rolled into SharePoint in 2006. And I think I've built my first collaboration project in SharePoint in 2012, really way in. Like I've been doing, the only thing I've been doing with SharePoint since Moz is internet sites.
Yeah.
Cool. Basically breaking all best practices and recommendations that we have nowadays. Like don't customize your master pages. Like don't don't
is a
use
master page?
HTTP
Excuse me?
modules.
What is a master page? Is there a master page?
Yeah, it's the thing that you are not supposed to touch.
Well, there isn't any master pages anymore, right? So
Of course there is. It's all ASP.NET. There is a master page. We just don't.
No, well, yeah. Anyway.
Of course there is a master page.
You can't really modify that on the modern. There's no.
Yes, but just because you can modify doesn't mean it isn't there.
Fair. Okay, fine point. Fair point. But Waldek, on the last weeks, so you've been not doing .com sites. So what have you been up to?
No. So I've been traveling. I actually gave a SharePoint development training to a customer of ours who are a company who are based on in Germany, and they just migrated or are about to migrate to SharePoint 2019 on-prem.
Yep.
And we talked about there were two main areas, actually three. Two of them were done by me. One was done by Irvin. The areas about which I talked to them was one, how we used to do things in the past versus how are we doing things now, right? Because they're on premises. So for them, the reality was, and even still is, WSPs, XML, provisioning, and all of that. And and then another one was SPFX. So SPFX on premises. Now we had a really long discussion. So originally we would plan that we had a number of topics, and we said we want to spend about an hour per topic. And the first one was difference, like coming from the past, going to the modern development now. We talked about it 3 hours, and we weren't done. So that just proves like how big of a switch it is actually to many who are still on premises, who don't live and breathe cloud, to try to leave behind or even put into perspective everything that we can do still on premises, but that isn't necessarily the best way to go, given things like your platform hygiene, performance, stability, upgradability, being ready to migrate to the cloud, and so forth and so on, right? So there are a number consequences of doing things the way we used to do things in the past, like me doing internet sites.
Yep.
Right. So there was one, and then another one was SPFX on premises. And preparing for the course, I was like, I know these things, and then we would talk about things like logging. How do you log things on premises? Like there is no App Insights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how do you? And then you try to dissect, okay, so what does it mean to have a custom thing like App Insights on premises? Well, it needs to scale. It's a lot of write operations. It needs to be able to batch requests because it's all clients has calls. You need to be able to authenticate to that thing. And there are like many things. It's like, wow, that's complicated.
Yeah,
right?
So many things we take for granted in the cloud.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Like in a cloud, these are just building blocks that we can just pick and use. Whereas on premise, like there is none of that. Like another interesting requirement they had, is what if we would have, and I guess the easiest way to explain it is the tenant properties equivalent on prem. Like, you would need to have a list somewhere. And you could store the data there. You would allow everybody to read, but only specific people to write. But then they would say, but then we have multiple web apps with different hosts. It's like, and then you need to authenticate again. So I was like, that is complicated.
Yep. Because obviously tenant properties are not available in on-prem because the tenant model isn't available in on-prem. We do not actually technically support that for on-premises. So even though some people actually implemented those at some point, even like in 2013 timeframe.
Around Adam's time, there was a way to kind of create a tenant site on-prem as well.
Technically you still need to do that in certain scenarios, but then it's kind of bypassing the code for having a one tenant as a farm, and it's complicated. But it's one of the things I had earlier today a chat with Irvin, and he was saying one of the things what was interesting around the training was the fact that there's so many things which the cloud is ahead of the game. It's like, you can do it, but not in on-prem, or you can do but not in on-prem. Even in SharePoint 2019, because we need to remember that it's cloud first. We've been releasing roughly 20 new versions already to the cloud after SharePoint 2019 was released on-prem or something like that. So,
but there's also a big upside that we realized together during the course, right? So in a cloud, one of the challenges we have to deal with is upgrading your SPFX projects to the latest version available in the cloud, because there are exactly one problem solved, right? Because there is one version available.
You don't have to do that in the cloud either if you don't want to.
Well, yes, but of course you want to, because there are new benefits, there's new version of TypeScript, there are new abilities, there is new feature. You don't have to, but you can. On premises you can. So there's that problem is solved for you.
Yeah, thank God. Thank God I don't have anything new for 3 years. Yes.
Solved as in, it's a solution. Yeah.
It's addressed. Yes.
Yeah, addressed.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. We talked about this a few times, I think, in these calls as well. So back in when we released the one version in 3 years, that was kind of a safe. It was more safer for a developer as an IT person as well, because you knew what you need to learn. That was a certain amount of things what you needed to learn to be able to successful. Right now, the things are just evolving so fast, and we're releasing a new version of SharePoint Framework again relatively soon. Another one in SPC or pretty close to SPC is in plans, something like that. Did I say that out loud? But don't quote me on that in Twitter.
I have no idea. I didn't listen.
It's on record now. It's on tape. Yeah.
Oh, we can bleep it out.
Exactly. But it's interesting for us even remembering that the community is having a hard time for keeping up, for understanding what's the new capabilities, everything else. When you were in on-premises, you were basically guaranteed to use the version for 2 years or something like that. And it was
probably more.
Even more than that, yes, absolutely. It's an interesting challenge how to keep up on things, and plus the fact that we need to still, as a Microsoft, we need to improve the versioning model, we need to improve the change documentation, we need to improve the what's available where. I was just having a discussion on email earlier today related on, for example, column formatting, which is supported actually in SharePoint 2019. But in our documentation, we do not call out which capabilities are in 2019 and which are in cloud. So how would you know? Well, only by testing. But it's a good example. We, as a Microsoft, we need to improve on this as well. So, Vardhaman, so what have you been up to lately related on SharePoint Dev topics, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so quite recently, I've been working on a project mostly for SPFX. We are using 1.7.1, I think. It's about, I think, about 35 or so components and extensions in there. So I'm starting to notice a few issues which I've logged on the SP Dev Docs list about long build times and so on. So, but yeah, it's been quite good. And also one thing which I'm looking forward to hopefully soon is the library packages support which would be useful in large projects like this. And on the community side, I've been helping Waldek with some of the Office 365 CLI and Teams commands, and I've been really impressed with the code reviews.
Mr. Teams.
I was in fact saying the type of code reviews which go in before PR goes. I'm really kind of impressed with how much detail they have.
Sorry.
No. It's actually been good. Trying to get. I haven't really done a lot of unit tests and TDD before, so this is something which is new, which definitely going forward. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. The one thing I wanted to ask, you mentioned libraries in SPFX.
Yeah.
What thing do you think they would address that you couldn't address otherwise with NPM packages?
So right now what the situation is that there is an NPM package which is locally created. But that NPM package gets bundled in every SPPKG file because it's just an NPM module. But with library packages, that code can be separated out into its own SPPKG file. Am I
correct? Yes, that is correct.
Something like that.
Yep.
So it's one thing which would be good is the code won't be duplicated, like the shared code. won't be duplicated a lot.
But that particular part in theory you could address with defining the script as an external and deploying it separately.
Sure, but then would it live in the app catalog as well, or would you have to host it in like Azure or something?
You could host it wherever you like.
You could host it in app catalog even, and then use the CDN URL to reference that. One way of doing that, but the library package is coming in 1.8 or right after when we get stuff documented. So all good. So, and it's understandable ask, absolutely. Yep. Now we have quite a few actually articles and discussions which we wanted to go through. So let's actually jump on the articles. So let's see how much time we'll take today again. Waldek, do you have a hard stop?
Actually not. I don't think so.
Awesome.
Yeah, so that is an exception. I don't have a meeting back to back with this
Typically
one.
You have. Typically you have. What about you, Vardhaman?
No, I'm good. It's kind of lunchtime, so I'm good.
Okay, so you're using lunchtime for this one, so let me actually get you there. So that's fine. Anyway, so let's actually go through this thing. So one of the things what we released last week, super cool webcast. I did fail. There's a small hiccup on the video editing of this one. There's a duplicate section of one section, but not a massive deal. But a webcast related on Modern Shares web part, which is available as an open source solution from Frank Cornu and Tarald Gosbach. So Tarald actually implemented this kind of an extensibility model on top of the web part, which is based on application customizer. So it's a really cool setup on how to have kind of a similar experience as classic SharePoint extensibility, the search extensibility UI. So you have a text box and you have a result, and you're able to define the templates, you're able to associate actions, and then Tarald basically then is extending that with the capability of having customer-specific functions, or executables associated to the web part. It's a really, really cool setup. And let's see if I can actually make this happen in a second. I'll just want to jump to an example here. That's not a good example, but here's where do we actually add? Let's see where we would actually have that multi-result web part. Well, this one is a good one. So, okay, let me pause in here. And we don't actually want to see other videos. It's basically having multiple set of web parts. So there's one web part over there, which is a text box web part, and then you have the results web part, like in the classic SharePoint, and then you're able to modify the results web part and associate that. Really, really cool setup for anybody to take advantage. And obviously, everything is open sourced, so you can just have a look on that. It's available in the SharePoint GitHub, and the guys are getting or improving this all the time. So the latest update is actually 3 hours ago. So
what are the odds that we will see something similar available out of the box?
This is interesting. So obviously the enterprise search is the new thing. So which increases the scope of the search, not only from SharePoint to the higher level, but sure, it has the same people are implementing the enterprise search experience than the SharePoint search. And yes, there are plans to use SharePoint Framework as an extensibility model for the enterprise search. What are those in practice? We'll see. One step
TBD.
at a time. To be decided, yes.
Yes.
So I know for a fact that there are good people getting recruited on leading that work, which will be public at some point. So I think we'll be successful on that. So people who are aware how SharePoint Framework works, and then they will work with us from the SharePoint Framework team to figure out how do we actually make this happen. But this one already is somebody is looking for having an extensible or configurable search results. If the out-of-the-box search results, what is it? What is it called? I can't remember the out-of-the-box web part. The modern
highlighted content.
Highlighted content web part. Yeah. So you can't modify the layout of that, and that's really the key challenge. But this case, this one actually provides that. So really cool stuff. And basically Frank Cornu and Harald and Mikael Svensson has been behind of the implementation. So really, really, really cool stuff. Cool. The other thing what we wanted to actually discuss quite more detailed was this one. This really, really good stuff from Zach Rosenfield. Zach is a group program manager from OneDrive and SharePoint Engineering, and his team is responsible of the GOCs, so the operationals, optimizations, and API calls and all of that behind of the scenes. So he's responsible technically on the throttling happening behind of the scenes and all of that. So he had a session.
Oh, so it's him.
Yes, he had a session. He had a session in Ignite related on the throttling and why do we do that and what does it actually mean and how to avoid that. And his team is working on optimizing the API layer as we speak. But what this is all about, this actually explains the challenge what we're also having internally inside of the SharePoint. SharePoint is a legacy solution. Well, that's a wrong way of putting that. SharePoint has a long
history. Has been around for a few years.
Around for a few years, yes. I think I saw internal message, was it on autumn, where Jeff Deeper shared something from 2001 when they did a mock-up of SharePoint for Microsoft leadership, which was pretty cool. So it's been around for a long time. And a product which has been around for a long time, it has legacy related on API layers and a lot of that stuff, because we can't always rewrite everything as we release a new version. That's just impossible. And that really shows then the challenge related on optimizing some of the SharePoint REST calls as an example. So if you're calling API webs, the query count is actually 18. If you call webs and you request a specific thing, the query count goes down to 3. And that's a really significant change. It's almost 50% reduced from a duration perspective as well.
Could we kind of talk a bit about what exactly is a query count? I mean, duration, I think, is probably straightforward.
Yes, that's the time I also spend on before we respond. The query count is what's happening behind of the scenes. So the SQL Server queries behind of the scenes in the server side. Yeah. So how many operations behind of that REST API call actually happens behind of the scenes? But that's a fair point. We probably should be more open around these things. And I think, Waldek, you had a good comment on this one, which was, should I quote you? You have no idea what it was.
No, I have no idea what I said or which one of the array of comments that I made about
one of those awesome comments which you made. I'm referring to right now. Okay, so you said basically, how would you as a third-party developer know the query counts of the operations? And the answer is no, you can't. We haven't documented it.
Right. So as you said, right, it's not easy for us to optimize the calls that we do, right? Because duration, that one comes back in the response. I'm not sure if that's duration of the SQL query or duration of the API call.
Yeah, I can't remember which one.
But there is value in that in response, but the query count, that is not exposed at all. So there's no way for us to even know the impact on servers from the calls that we issue.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I can imagine it would be impossible for you to have docs like this, like for each kind of API call to have that in docs, but at least if that came back from the API, at least then we would know, like, query count should be below, I don't know, 5 or 4. Everything up is probably a reason to optimize.
Yeah, I think, well, in general, we should actually come up with a high-level recommendation and documentation, because obviously releasing a Twitter tweet which is saying, don't do this, that's not documentation.
Well, that is already the first step.
Well, that's a first step.
Awareness, to raise awareness, right?
Increase the awareness, absolutely. But then the official documentation has to be updated. And that means then that we would need to go through the basic scenarios internally and double check the query counts and then release those openly. And I think that's something absolutely what we should be doing sooner or later. Now, can we allocate resources on doing that in a short time frame? Let's see. But that's the only way we could actually make this more visible. Now, obviously, somebody might say, well, why don't you fix that? Why is the query count 18? And then various numerous reasons why it's 18. And again, SharePoint has such a huge legacy. It has a lot of history. And that means that we cannot optimize that in the same way as an example for Graph API. And even Graph API has certain recommendations related on how you should be calling the Graph API. But Graph API is a new version of the API layer, which is optimized to be used for example, from web parts and external usage. The SharePoint Classic REST APIs, it's different. It's different. We introduced that back in, when was it? 2013. The first version in 2010, but that was highly limited through client SVC, and then the right version was in the 2013.
So the Graph API basically calls a different set of SQL queries and stuff behind the scenes. Is that
correct? That is correct. Yeah. So I think we in one of these weekly calls, we actually had an architectural map where we kind of explained what happens behind the scenes. So the Graph API calls a SharePoint APIs behind the scenes, but not these. It has a separate layer. V2 API, so it has a separate proxy which is using to get through to the data in SharePoint, which is then more optimized for that kind of usage. So the V1, so-called V1 APIs are just, well, they're evolving. It's more evolutional, unfortunately, and we need to figure out how do we optimize things and how do we document things? But it's a really interesting discussion. The difference is pretty huge, 6 times more query counts and almost 50% increase on time.
And I guess that either way, I mean, sure, I am aware of the fact that like we cannot fix everything. And I mean, I'm saying we because I am a part of PnP, and PnP has the power and ability, has the force to do some things, but even us, like there are only that many hours in a day, right?
Sure.
So in the end, I think that the first step, at least if I would see it from my point of view, the query count, to know that, because that way, because why is this important? So sure, amount of time that a call is going to take is important in a way if you want things to be responsive, but more important to me is to avoid being
Correct.
Right? Because the more queries you execute server-side in SQL, the bigger the odds that you will be limited.
Because you're increasing the CPU usage,
exactly.
And therefore you will get then eventually backfired in because the query count was too high. Yeah,
exactly.
That's
so for me, that will be like the first step that we should get addressed, and we in that regards, product group engineers, is to expose the query count.
Yep.
And basically let us know. And assuming that there is no sensitive things like, well, if you knew the query count, then you would specifically look for the highest one to DDoS no, because then you'll be logged and all that, right?
Well, but that's why throttling exists. So
exactly.
Throttling exists for handling DDoS scenarios, and that's why.
Intentionally or not. Intentionally or not, right?
Exactly. But we need to take care of those DDoS scenarios as well. So because somebody might be trying to do a denial of service attacks, and basically we just need to block them. And that's why we've been seeing them problems related on throttling, because every now and then some software might actually look like that it's trying to DDoS us down.
Yeah.
And then we need to block it so it's not impacting other tenants, and then we might have problems.
Exactly.
It's not definitely do more good than harm, I guess.
Yes,
sure. Yeah, so first step, expose the query count. Let us know how much impact everything that we do has, so that we can optimize, even if it will take a while for the guidance and docs to come.
Sure. That's a fair feedback. I'll talk with Zach. So we'll see what we can make happen. So
is there a chance that we will see him at the summit?
Maybe.
He's around in Redmond, right?
Yes, he's in Redmond.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I don't think Zach has a specific session in the MVP summit, but if he will drop by, in the API session for SharePoint, which is run by Jeremy Kelly and Kathy Du, but for MVPs. So
yes. And
this is not an MVP call. This is our video recording. So anyway. MVP Summit next week. Anyway, so the second thing, kind of just pinpointing this one. So in the same way as with SharePoint, the same actually applies for Microsoft Graph. So if you are using these APIs, try to select only those things which you're interested in doing, because you will reduce then the payload. Which makes perfect sense. So. Good. Moving on to things, so something related on SharePoint Framework. This one was interesting from Tragan, related on the fact that he works for K2. He's an MVP as well. But obviously, he's been testing around this scenario on how do I call securely K2 workflow APIs from SharePoint, SharePoint Framework. And it's relatively straightforward, fully supported scenario. So there's a Azure AD application. It has a specific then permissions in the call. That's actually the REST call, where he's actually then calling the API K2. You will need to when you will be using the Azure AD client, all of the token handling, everything else is being abstracted from you, and as long as you have granted the permissions using the Azure AD, you'll be good to go. And that's it, basically. In general, I think I've been saying this for a long time since we actually were able to make this happen in SPFX. Really, the calling securely custom API in Azure from SPFX, it is the holy grail scenario of SharePoint. Because that's where you can actually expose business-oriented data, customer-specific data in the front page of the portal. Or a Microsoft Teams application, which is then using this layer to get access on the LOB data and exposing that, like we've been showing in our demos. So
unless you are on premises and there is no AAD, and yet you have to securely call APIs that are not anonymously available.
But that's different. You have a native authentication model in on-premises, but
for client-side calls, native authentication models, not really.
If you're using IE, yes.
Oof, yes. Security zones.
The one good thing I think definitely with SPFX is how abstracted it makes the authentication, and I definitely like that because there's so many times with the add-in model that there's so much time spent configuring authentication, but with SPFX it just works. So that kind of. Particularly myself, don't like dealing too much with auth stuff, so it's just I can as soon as I can write some code, that will be good. That's why I like SPFX.
Dealing with the auth stuff is all the way from actually solving the business scenario, because that's like the base, that's the plumbing. Come on, let me get rid of this so I can actually implement whatever I'm meant to do. So absolutely makes sense. And that's really been one of the objectives of SPFX, and that's why Teams people actually wanted to start playing with us, whatever that means, but because we abstract the complexity. We take care of the hosting, we take care of the authentication, we take care of all of this stuff and make it as simple as possible for anybody to use. So massively more easier for developers to implement stuff. Moving on things, from David, a new video related on SharePoint Modern Themes, create a two-tone theme. So he's doing video blocking and he had a community call demos pretty recently in SPFX call on how to actually create modern themes using a REST API from web parts and all of that. So really cool stuff. And there it is actually, PnP web part theme manager, how to make things happen, and open source code is available for anybody to take advantage. So really good. This one was from, I'm missing the name, David from Alho. And David basically add a logo to hub site and all associated sites automatically. So basically creating a PowerShell and PnP PowerShell for accessing the hub sites and then associating and adding the logo for the hub site and then all the subsites as well. Let's see what's actually happening here. I haven't double checked this one. We're looking in the modern sites. We're actually getting a list of them. We're getting if the site is same as the hub site, then we do the actual thing. Yes, and then we're actually associating the logo and setting that to the site logo URL. Yep. So you basically can easily then copy and consistent logo for the hub site towards all of the sites which are associated to the hub site. Maybe we should actually have a site design action for this because there is a capability with site designs that run a site design when a site is getting associated to a hub site. Yeah. So that way we would be able to then automate associating a logo to the site which are getting associated to the hub site based on a hub. Absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, but then if you change the logo on the hub, then you still need to consistently change everything.
That's actually a fair point. That is a good point. So anyway,
so you would build this ideally as a flow that runs every night and checks, like gets all the hubs or associated sites, invalid dates or checks the logo.
you could easily do that. Absolutely.
Or an Azure function if you
or an Azure function. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like talking about earlier, like there's so many options to do all these.
Or the Logic app, or a button-driven flow on your phone,
or the CLI from somewhere. Yeah.
Console
or you would run a VM in Azure, which would have a scheduled task.
Yes. And if you're in on-prem, you would be implementing a Windows service, which is running under the Windows. Anyway.
Timer job.
So many options. Exactly.
You would provision a complete SharePoint farm to run a timer job that does that in a cloud.
Yeah.
Well, that is an option.
That seems efficient. Yeah.
Yes. As long as it's an Azure D4 machine or whatever, you'll be fine.
Serious. Serious.
And serious. Yes, exactly. As a Microsoft employee, I will approve that message. No. Anyway. More revenue for us, come on. No, this one is a React artificial intelligence images suggestion. What was the joke? The artificial intelligence is in PowerPoint, machine learning is in Azure.
Yes.
Yeah. So calling something artificial intelligence is, well, anyway. Because there is a pretty big difference on artificial intelligence and machine learning, but hey, it's a buzzwords. But basic idea is that, hey, how do we execute an Azure Cognitive Services to analyze the incoming picture, which has been added to the SharePoint using a web part. So I'm thinking this case, and then using a search for exposing that in a web part as well. So there is a nice animation in here. So drag and dropping an image to the web part, then doing a quick analysis of that image, and then doing a query on a similar images which are already stored in the SharePoint. And obviously taking advantage of the machine learning. It is really fast, by the way. And I think, I can't remember where we tested machine learning.
Things you can do in video, right?
Well, that's true as well. Yeah, that is fair. That is fair. But the machine learning for vision recognition is computer vision stuff. It was really impressive. I can't remember somebody had a blog post pretty recently on that one. It was actually Tony Paul. We had the weekly recording with Martina, and then we analyzed the picture and saw what the machine learning was able to analyze from the picture, and it was really amazing. So what is able to actually pinpoint and realize what's on the image. So really, really cool stuff. But I think there's a code sample available from this one. There's nice step of guidance how to make this happen and how to then use Flow actually for the starting the machine learning piece on the process.
This is pretty cool, I think. Calling a flow and from an SPFX web part. And then having that run the cognitive services stuff. Pretty cool.
Really cool. Good. Moving on, two more items to actually talk through. So SharePoint Framework Tenant Properties web part, really nice from Shao. Waldek, help me. Wow. I will learn this in 2020.
I will. You will. By the end of the year.
Yes. I have one task and 1 minute. This is basically for administrators to manage tenant properties. We do not have a UI for managing tenant properties in SharePoint. There is a PowerShell commandlets, and you can use a CLI or the REST API. It's actually listed in here what's available for managing the tenant properties. But hey, why not? If you're a tenant administrator, wouldn't it make sense to have the tenant properties exposed as a web part and then easily manage that? So absolutely.
And there might not be all the time a person there who knows PowerShell and CLI, but who still has to somehow work with the tenant properties. So it's hugely useful in those cases.
Absolutely. You can really easily also probably break a lot of the web parts on the tenant if you just start modifying these settings.
True, yeah.
But what would be just an example for the recording as well? What would be the scenarios where tenant properties are useful?
So I think I've used it before to store the application insights key and also the another Azure, I think, cognitive services key as well, which again would be used by all SPFX web parts in that tenant. So it's good. Although there's always the property bag and stuff, but then with no scripts and everything, there's another complication in there. But I think tenant properties is a pretty good way to store kind of config data tenant-wide.
Yeah, and also for things like URLs of APIs, right? That might change between dev, test, and prod.
Exactly.
Like you would have the different URL for test and different one in prod. So that would be also typically a place where you would be able to put that.
Yep. Absolutely makes sense. Now that reminded me on the fact that I have on my endless list of to-do lists, I have a spec request to write that key value pair model for site collection, even though the site collection would be in NoScript mode. So basically the same thing.
So site collection tenant properties.
Site collection properties, but not the classic pair stored in a site collection level, because we can do that already in tenant level. Why not actually have that support for SPFX also in NoScript site collections?
And then ideally you call them in the context of a site, and the site collection level overrule the tenant level, and it's transparent, so you don't need to pick which one you want. You just pick one and then give me
some notes on that one.
We can spec the whole thing here live.
Exactly. Anything else what you want?
Cache. Make it fast.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's basically for what Vardhaman was saying, that if it's a NoScript site collection, which by default all of the modern site collections are NoScript site collections, you cannot modify property back entries. You can read property back entries, but you can't modify them. It's not supported, and that's by design. And somebody might argue that why is that limitation there? But there's
a reason.
There are reasons behind of that, and we can change that model. So let's rather then introduce a new layer of key value pairs, which we can modify in the site collection level from a web part. So, ta-da, problem solved. So,
by the way, did you just say that disabling the NoScript flag on a modern site is not supported?
No, I said modifying the property back in a NoScript site is not supported, but you can.
Well, yeah, because you cannot do it.
You can't.
It's physically impossible.
Correct. Now, you can go and modify the NoScript tag in the modern site collection, but it's not definitely recommended.
Yes. Okay, got it. Just wanted to clarify that.
Exactly. Because there is a reason why the NoScript tag actually exists.
Yes.
And only tenant administrator can modify that, because you're basically then exposing a security threat within a tenant if you do that. So good. And then the final thing, final piece from Chris O'Brien, Vardhaman's colleague. Is Chris a good guy to work with? No pressure.
Oh, definitely. he's my boss, so I have to say that.
He's the best. Hi, Chris.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. All good here. Yeah.
Can we move on? Move on. But anyway, so create Microsoft Teams from a template. So you're able to create JSON-based templates and then push these to a REST API, Microsoft Graph API, which will then create the team structure based on the JSON definition, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we have been building provisioning engines for a while, the PNP partner pack and everything. So nowadays I've seen some requirements come up that, hey, you're already provisioning sites for us. Why not work with groups and then potentially teams as well? So things like these would definitely be useful going forward.
Yep. And this one is is this a native out-of-the-box functionality, or this is actually Chris's code, which is doing the REST calls towards the graph calls?
So the graph API exists right now.
Exactly.
I think it's in beta.
Exactly.
And then there's I think some C# code HTTP client which calls the graph API.
Yep.
So
Yeah, so there is an API to create a team from a template, but there is no API to extract a template from a team.
Yeah.
Which is a pity, by the way, because that would make so much sense that you would be able to click through the template structure and the team structure in a team.
This one.
that's the one extract, and you would get the JSON file.
And then again, you would have a flow that would do it every night to have the new template.
Well, yeah, and maybe
a different set of VMs in Azure.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
SharePoint farm with a timer job.
It would be a nice community project to have that export theme as a JSON definition.
Yeah, but then in what? In PowerShell, in C#, in Node, in all of them?
Yeah, fair point.
In Flow. I wonder how long it takes until we get to the point that we can, in a one shape or another, have like not code things that we need to get and re-implement, but things that we can just call and they will work. Like common functions or common flows. Because like
So when do we get to the point where we don't have to write any code and then we just call a thing?
Well, we are there already. It's Flow. It's called Flow.
But you still need to define what you're actually doing there. Come on.
Well,
right?
yeah, but I mean, like the thing is, right? Like if you,
I've got to, by the way, stop sharing. So let's continue the discussion with that.
Right. So if you think about it, right, there are people who work in PowerShell. If you would give them C# code, they won't work. So they will be another group. There's another group like me who works in Node. Well, then for them you have to do it in Node, and then like it seems like doing the same thing over and over again. Why?
I think the simplest way is just create an API and let people call it from wherever they want.
And I guess like the biggest need that I see for that is the API for the modern page to add a web part, remove web, like this, because complexity of that is immense and it changes regularly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like, and whenever there is like some div would change or some class or some hierarchy, and that's perfectly fine because Pages DOM is not an API. So I understand that you guys at Microsoft have the right to change that, but the world needs a official way to interact with the page and elements on it. So we need an API for that. And like to maintain that API, that's just on our end, that's just inefficient, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're working on it. I can't give any timelines right now, but I can say that I've seen a current timelines. So it has an objective date.
So would it be fair to say that depending when you watch this video, the API might have shipped? Like if you watch it in 3 years? Or not?
Absolutely. That is a fair point to say. So you can assume that within 3 years that API exists. So that much I can promise.
Yeah. There you go. So now we have an ETA.
Yeah. Anywhere between 0 to 900 days.
Yes.
Exactly.
T minus.
But it's well, this is a classic discussion. We've been having this such many times. As we know that we need to have a modern pages API. We know that has to happen. But then at the same time, we need to get the modern pages on a certain level. And guess what? It's the same set of engineers. So when do we actually are agreeing that the pages are in the right level, and then we start implementing the API, and do we split the engineers?
So I have for you a golden tip. Next week, there will be 2,000 really enthusiastic people coming to Redmond.
Yes.
They would love to help you out with that.
I'll get all MVPs working on SharePoint Office.
SharePoint or not, I mean, these are just APIs. So we will have SQL people, we'll have .NET people.
That's fair because you can actually calculate that in a way that if the work estimate for the modern pages API in a graph would be 2,000 minutes, right? If we put 2,000 persons on that,
it's still going to take 2,000 minutes.
1 minute.
No. Oh, that doesn't work like that.
Oh, it doesn't.
But anyways, like there is a group of people coming your way, not your way, but the Microsoft way. Like make use of that.
Yes, something. Yeah.
Contribute already.
Well, some do. Absolutely. Okay. Any last words, Vardhaman? What are you expecting next week?
Summit.
You've been briefed on what's happening there. Chris has explained.
I've seen some PowerPoint slides, and I've seen everything. So looking forward to it. Definitely.
Do you have any chance in advance or afterwards to walk around or to go to Seattle or see things?
Yes, I've I think 2 days before the summit and 2 days after the summit, I'll probably
Nice.
some Seattle, see some Seattle.
Very nice.
Never been to Seattle before, so really looking forward to all the nice places as well.
Cool.
So will you be staying in then Bellevue and then?
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Exactly.
Yeah, Bellevue is a super clean and nice place, and I love Seattle downtown as well. I really like that because it is
like a short ride away, isn't it?
Yes, it's pretty short from Bellevue. Obviously, traffic is horrible. It's always nowadays horrible in Redmond, but the downtown is relatively small, so you can actually walk across all of the meaningful places, like the Space Needle and the harbor area and all of that.
Space Needle and Pike's Place. That's I mean, sure, you can walk anything you want.
Everything is relative.
Well, yeah, depending like how much time do you want and the weather and the rain.
Like Space Needle and Pike Place are close to each other.
Yeah, they're relatively close. Everything is relative. I would say that's like 2 kilometers, which is, for me at least, it's nothing. But again, depends, and you can take an Uber, so that's not a problem. Yeah. And of course, it will be raining anyway because it's Seattle. So.
Yeah, and there's snow and stuff there now as well, isn't it? It's like there was snow at least last week.
Yeah. So that should be now fine. To be fair, I on the weekend, I think I saw from Bill Baer that it was again snowing, but I don't think. Snowmageddon is done, so that should not happen again. It's once in a 10-year when it gets that much snow. At least
it's exactly in the week of the MVP summit.
Yeah, that would be
You're welcome.
So on that one, I have to say a quick joke on the when was it? 1.5 years ago, I flew over for Tech Ready or something and visiting the office, and I landed on Sunday evening like 11 p.m. and it was pouring snow, and that's like okay, so. Well, I will definitely get a car by myself because I'm not going to sit on the backseat of anybody else's car on this weather. Not going to happen. So I've created on the 4-wheel drive, but they don't have any winter tires. So it was really nice drive from the airport to the Redmond because I'm staying in Redmond quite often. And there was like tens and tens of cars on the sideways of the highway. But it's just weird. Abandoned cars, yes. even gaps and caps all around the highway because they've gone somewhere.
Yeah.
And the locals don't understand how risky it is because they don't have any experience.
Yeah, they're not used to it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're just driving like madmen on the snow, and I'm like. Well, as long as I get there, I don't have no rush. And then on the following morning, there was 2 friends like Frank Marasco and Bert Janssen was on the town. And they like in the morning or already in the evening, there's like, hey, so do you have a car? Yep. So we'll drive with you. You'll know how to get to the rather than using an Uber or anything else.
Yeah.
The only people who arrived even to the office on the following day were actually the Europeans. And then
Anna Frank.
by accident, Anna Frank with me, and then there was fast people, so Microsoft Norwegian arriving because Norwegians didn't consider this to be a fast.
Wednesday, okay.
Business as usual for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's completely silent otherwise. It's a super weird experience.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll see you both next week then.
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. But thank you, Vardhaman, for joining, and thank you, Waldek, once again. We need to figure out, by the way, how do we do it next week at some point.
Well, we are together at the summit.
We are.
Take out laptops, find place to record, and we record, and we roll.
That's probably the right way to do that. So let's see that on next week. So thank you, everybody.
Yes. Thank you.
We'll come up with a new one in a week.
Thank you.